Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the deficit deadlift and a line that I love to use. And again, I always give credit to Paul Carter because he's the person who, as far as I know of personally, coined this line. It's where I got it from, and I don't like to steal something as valuable as this. Give credit where credit is due. And that is that we go to the gym to build strength, not to demonstrate it. Right? We go to the gym to build strength, not to demonstrate it. Now, you go to a powerlifting meet to demonstrate strength, but we're in the gym to build strength. And things like the conventional deadlift, once you get outside of the novice phase, can very quickly become a demonstration of strength rather than a builder of strength. And why is that? What do I mean by that? Well, it has to do with the amount of fatigue that it generates. A conventional deadlift can be insanely difficult to recover from due to the loads that it places on the spine, the axial loading, because of the partial nature of most of the movements involved. Most of the joints involved, the joint angles, are not worked through a full range of motion. It has enormous amounts of isometric benefits, right? That's why when you look at something like the conventional deadlift, I point out that it actually builds the mid traps extremely well due to isometrics, right? It's actually better than a lot of exercises that people think build the trap, silly stuff like the above the knee rack pull. The pull from the floor is actually better for that due to the isometrics involved, right? Because of that low angle involved. But, obviously, like the deficit deadlift, if you see it, does that even better. It does it even more effectively. But I digress. Back to the point. There's a lot of isometrics involved. There's a lot of half movements involved as far as joint angles go. And that does reduce its hypertrophic potential, right? It reduces its hypertrophic potential. Now, it makes it an all-around fantastic strength builder. It does. It does. It's a great exercise if it didn't generate so much fatigue. And that's the problem we run into with the deadlift. It's just the amount of fatigue that it generates. And a lot of it has to do with, again, the fact that there's so many partial angles involved and so many muscles involved that we lift an enormous amount of weight. An enormous amount of weight without necessarily maximizing tension on the majority of the muscles involved. And it's that lack of tension because we're not at the most unfavorable joint angles, right? Just like if you don't go all the way down on a bench press, you can lift a lot more weight, but you don't get as much stimulus. You won't grow as much, even if you use a heavier weight. Well, that's part of the problem we run into with the deadlift. And it's my favorite exercise. I mean, it is my absolute favorite exercise. And I am not willing to easily admit that it has those problems because it's my favorite lift. But I think for general strength building, once people get outside of that novice phase, because novices grow really well. I mean, I could have novices do just deadlifts and they would probably grow with nothing but deadlifts if that's all you threw at them for their first 3 months in the gym. They'd get really strong at it, and then everything would stop growing because they would eventually stagnate because it's not a full range of motion exercise and everything else. And as they get stronger, they'd run into the fatigue problems, but they would grow off of it. Great exercise. But again, we run into these problems with fatigue. And a lot of that can be resolved with something like the deficit deadlift. Like you guys see me standing on a plate that's just over 2.5 inches, right? And I'm in boots, right? I'm in boots, which add even more. So that gives me at least a 3-inch deficit, above a 3-inch deficit between the boots, between standing on that plate. That reduces the amount of weight you can handle. But it's reducing the amount of weight you can handle by doing what? Adding more joint angles and creating more tension on several muscles. If you look at several of the muscles involved, things like the hamstrings, things like that, because of the deeper knee angle and the hip angle involved, right? We're actually getting a longer range of motion on things like the hamstring, hips, glutes, all these muscles. Plus, look, you have to bend over slightly more, which again, more isometric tension being placed on the trapezius. So if we're trying to build those muscles up with a big, heavy movement, the deficit deadlift actually puts more tension on those muscles, even with a slightly lighter weight. We can't lift as much weight because, again, we've increased the range of motion through the hardest part of the exercise. And, again, we've created more tension on those muscles. They have to work harder. All right, we've changed the torque. We've changed the leverages. So what do we get there? We get an exercise that gives us more muscle activation with slightly less weight on an exercise that loads the spine. Well, what's that do? Well, that means we get more training effect. We get more muscle stimulation, per unit of fatigue. That means that you can do more training volume from it, and it means that you can also, even if you do the same training volume, you can recover slightly faster. Well, that means that your weekly and monthly training volumes on the deficit can be higher, right? They can be higher because if you're being forced to use, say, 10% less weight to get the same amount of muscle fiber activation on every rep, then again, more training response, less fatigue. All right, that's a beneficial thing. That's useful. So the deficit deadlift is very beneficial in terms of the hypertrophic effect of having a deadlift that actually can give you slightly more hypertrophy. And again, it just has to do with stimulus versus fatigue ratios. That's it. That's it. It's a little simple thing, but it matters. It doesn't matter for the novice. It matters once you start getting more advanced, though, and you start moving heavier weights. So you have all of that to look at, and then we have the other thing. It is a direct assistance movement for the deadlift. In other words, if you get stronger at your deficit deadlift, your conventional deadlift will go up in proportion. Now, what do I mean? Well, what I mean is if you have a 500 deadlift and you go and you find that your conventional deadlift at any given deficit, your deficit deadlift is, say, 450, and you, over the course of a couple of months, take that 450 deficit deadlift up to 470, when you go test your conventional deadlift again, you're going to find that you're immediately going to be 20 plus pounds stronger on it also. It has direct carryover because it's almost an identical bar path. It's an identical bar path, but a slightly harder version of it that makes you use slightly more range of motion, which means when you go look at the strength changes in the joint angles, whenever you get stronger at any given joint angle, you get full transference at up to 15 degrees. Anything beyond that, it starts getting reduced. You don't get full transference of the strength gain. So as long as we're staying within 15 degrees of the start on all those joint angles at the bottom of the conventional deadlift, we get 100% strength carryover because it's essentially the same bar path and the same technique. The other benefit we get is that it forces you to learn to get tighter at the bottom of a conventional deadlift. So this is where it builds the strength also. Because it's harder to pull because the bar is further down and you're pushed further away from the floor relative to the bar, the hardest part of a deadlift is the bottom. We've extended the hardest part of the exercise. That forces you, with the deficit deadlift, to find foot placements and angles and bar paths and positions that allow you to break that weight off the floor in an even harder position. All right, that trains you to get really good at breaking the weight off the floor. And it was a tool that I used personally many years ago, way back in my mid-20s. My max deadlift was stuck at 525. And when I tried to pull 530, guess what? I couldn't break it off the floor. It would stick directly on the floor. So I started doing deficit deadlifts. And I started with a deficit deadlift of something like 450, like a 3-inch deficit, right? I started with a 450 and I spent several months doing exclusively deficit deadlifts. All the way until I got that 3-inch deficit all the way up to 525. And when I got that 3-inch deficit up to 525, I kind of deloaded and I came back the next week and I decided to pull my 530. And I did. So I walked in and hit that weight, even though I had not done the deadlift, the specific conventional deadlift. I came in and I hit it. I hit the 530 and it was easy. So I went up to 540 and I pulled that easy. I came back the next week and pulled 550. And I think over the course of the next month after that, I took my deadlift all the way from that up to something like 575. So me doing several months, after spending months and months stuck at 525, me spending several months of doing that, I put 50 pounds on my deadlift as an advanced lifter already, right? Obviously, I've been training a little while if I've been stuck at 525 for months. It put 50 pounds on my deadlift. All right, that's pretty fantastic. And I did that without performing a single conventional deadlift. I did it purely by training the deficit deadlift religiously until I got my deficit up equal to my conventional. And then my conventional just exploded. It's a valuable tool, guys. It's a valuable tool for the advanced lifter. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.